Number 10. Shane and Chasn Jane Mays. Louise Smith struggled with mental health issues and had an extremely strained relationship with her mom when social services moved her to her aunt and uncle, Shane and Chasn Mays' home. Things initially went smoothly at the property in Hampton, England, but took a wrong turn in early 2020 when the young woman was declared missing. Her disfigured and charred remains were later discovered in a wooded area just 2 weeks later. A medical examiner concluded that Louise was bludgeoned to death before her body was set on fire. The Mays were like parent figures to the troubled teen, which is why family members and friends were completely shocked when they were charged with Louise's murder. Shortly before her death, she had accused her uncle Shane of flirting with her and crossing an unspoken line. He also apparently made her uncomfortable in other ways as well. Shane eventually admitted to murdering Louise after an argument broke out between him, his wife, and the girl. He denied killing the young woman, but simply admitted to manslaughter. During his trial, he described how he could distinctly hear her bones cracking as he struck her in the face multiple times. He said that he somehow lost his temper and couldn't control himself any longer. In his own words, he just carried on with the attack until Louise was dead. At the same time, Shane denied ever punching Louise or physically assaulting her before that day, but accused Chasn of abusing her. Text message conversations of Chasn telling Shane to get help for his anger issues suggested otherwise, though. The court finally found him guilty of murder after a long deliberation, and he was sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years. Since then, prosecutors have appealed for a heavier sentence, arguing that 25 years is too light of a punishment, considering the violent and horrific nature of the crime. Number 9. Diego de Souza Arruda Reyes and Suelen Miguez. After moving to England from Brazil in 2014, Diego de Souza Arruda Reyes and Suelen Miguez built up a sophisticated drug distribution network that specifically catered to buyers throughout the whole of London. The business advertised its inventory on social media websites, along with a promise to deliver within 10 minutes or less after receiving an order. Drivers could pick up their orders at a series of rotating stash houses and then deliver the goods to customers. Miguez and Arruda Reyes held weekly staff meetings, encouraged their employees to submit ideas, and rewarded their best drivers each and every month. But they mainly took a hands-off approach to the day-to-day business operations of their illicit scheme. Meanwhile, they profited millions. They lived in a luxurious 7-bedroom mansion in an upscale neighborhood, drove a Lamborghini, and took expensive vacations overseas. Law enforcement eventually worked its way into the gang, and the glitz and glam came to an end years after the couple arrived in England. During a raid of the suspect's storage unit, police found millions of dollars worth of a dangerous chemical called GBL, resulting in the largest seizure of the drug in the UK's history. Authorities also found crystal meth, cocaine, ecstasy, ketamine, heroin, LSD, cannabis, and more. Miguez, Arruda Reyes, and 4 other gang members were sentenced to a total of 52 years in prison, with the couple receiving a 13-year sentence each. Number 8. Elizabeth Haysom and Jens Soring. As the Canadian daughter of a steel executive and the German-born son of a diplomat, Elizabeth Haysom and Jens Soring had wealthy and extremely privileged upbringings. Brought together by their awkwardness and their arrogance, they met and started dating in the 1980s while attending the University of Virginia. The couple also bonded over their family issues, including Elizabeth's allegedly strict and abusive parents, Nancy and Derek Haysom, who openly disliked their daughter's new boyfriend. In April 1985, Derek and Nancy were found stabbed to death in their shared Lynchburg, Virginia home. They were attacked so violently that they were practically decapitated. Nothing seemed to be missing, though, despite the couple's enormous wealth, ruling out a robbery gone wrong. Police began suspecting Elizabeth and Jens based on Elizabeth's bizarre and inconsistent stories, which seemed like a poor attempt to divert attention to other suspects and to demonize the victims. The couple briefly went on the run and were arrested in England, where they were living under fake names. Jens admitted to the murders but later recanted his confession. Evidence revealed that Elizabeth rented out a hotel room in Washington, D.C. on the suspected night of the crime. She also got a car, which Jens was accused of driving to her parents' home while Elizabeth stayed behind. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of accessory to murder and was then sentenced to 90 years in prison. Soering was convicted of murder and handed 2 life sentences. Since then, Jens has continued maintaining his innocence while he and Elizabeth point their fingers at each other, despite their past love. They were both paroled in 2020 after serving 33 years and were deported to Canada and Germany. Under the conditions of their release, they were banned from entering the US or any of its territories for the rest of their lives. Number 7. Valerie McDaniel and Leon Jacob. When a divorced mother of one named Valerie McDaniel first met the successful attorney Leon Jacob, she thought he was very arrogant. But he apparently started to grow on her, and soon enough the veterinarian was smitten with the man who was 10 years her junior. Before long, Jacob moved into McDaniel's lavish apartment in Houston. By all outward appearances, the 2 divorcees were driven professionals who were eagerly starting a new chapter of life together. But their bond was actually driven by dysfunction and a bitterness toward the past that they couldn't let go of. Specifically, they both had a history of volatile relationships and a shared desire to kill their exes. They were also both struggling financially despite seeming well off. McDaniel claimed that her ex-husband, Mac McDaniel, abused her, and they were in a heated child custody battle. Jacob already had 1 conviction under his belt for attempting to stalk his ex-wife, Annie Jacob, and was facing assault and stalking allegations in connection to another recent ex-girlfriend, Megan Verikas. If convicted, it would jeopardize Jacob's dream of becoming a doctor. So he shopped around for a hitman to kill Verikas and McDaniel's ex-husband, and someone told the police. An undercover officer posing as a hitman recorded a conversation with Jacob and McDaniel, who agreed to pay $10,000 for the murders. In the meantime, law enforcement told the intended victims and had them pose for photographs pretending to be dead. The couple didn't want to see the photos, but were happy to hand over a $1,800 installment payment according to a plan they had agreed on. At that point, officers arrested Jacob and McDaniel for solicitation of capital murder. McDaniel bonded out of jail and jumped off her balcony before her case went to trial. Jacob pleaded not guilty and claimed he was innocent, but the jury wasn't convinced. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Number 6. Diane Zamora and David Graham. Texas couple Diane Zamora and David Graham started dating as high school seniors in 1995. A few months later, Diane noticed David acting strange. He eventually confessed to cheating on her with his track teammate, Adrienne Jones, when he drove her home after a meet. David later claimed that Diane demanded he kill Adrienne. The couple hatched a sick plot for him to invite the girl out for a drive while Diane hid in the back of the car. Adrienne took the bait and accompanied David to a remote reservoir where Diane confronted her about the cheating incident. The terrified young girl reportedly admitted to it, but said that she felt guilty. The apologetic admission wasn't good enough for Diane, though. She became enraged and attacked Adrienne. After a brief struggle, Adrienne escaped from Diane. As she ran away, David shot her in the head twice with a 9mm handgun. Adrienne's body was discovered not long after the murder, but police took months to identify a suspect. In the meantime, Diane and David carried on with their lives like nothing happened. The couple got engaged, graduated high school, and joined the military. They were sent to different academies, but promised to stay faithful. About a year after Adrienne's murder, Diane confessed to her roommates about the crime. The roommates reported her to the police, and Diane and David were finally brought in for questioning. They both admitted to the murder. The victim's family asked the court to spare them from the death penalty, landing them each a life sentence behind bars with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Number 5. Nancy and Trey Styler. 57-year-old Nancy Pfister was the daughter of a wealthy businessman. Her dad helped turn the town of Aspen, Colorado into an upscale skiing spot. Before leaving for a 6-month Australian vacation in 2013, the small-town socialite rented her home out to a retired doctor named Trey Styler and Nancy, his wife. But the arrangement didn't work, and Pfister evicted the Stylers over a rent dispute. She returned to the US early to deal with the situation and held their belongings as collateral for the $14,000 they owed in rent. The Stylers told a different version of the story, claiming that Pfister was an alcoholic who treated them like her personal slaves whenever she was in town. They accused her of blaming them for the home smelling like smoke, even though Pfister was a smoker herself. They say this was an excuse to keep their security deposit, and Pfister made the dispute public with her Facebook posts and comments, which only added fuel to the fire. A few days after coming back to Colorado, Pfister's personal assistant found her bludgeoned to death in her walk-in closet. Suspicion naturally turned to the Stylers, who were living in a hotel. The couple claimed they couldn't have committed the murder since they no longer had access to Pfister's home, and because Trey was practically wheelchair-bound, making him an unlikely candidate to beat someone to death. Their stories fell apart, though, when police went through their garbage and found some of Pfister's belongings, along with a bloody hammer with Trey's DNA. The key to Pfister's walk-in closet was also found on the ground outside the Stylers' hotel room. Authorities arrested and charged the pair with first-degree murder. Trey pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal that would spare his wife from prison. He claimed that he acted alone and drove to Pfister's house to confront her about their feud. According to Trey's confession, he waited for Pfister to fall asleep and then attacked her in a violent rage. He received a life sentence that was later commuted to 20 years, but died a few years into his sentence at only 67 years old. The case against Nancy Styler was dropped, and she has consistently maintained that she knew nothing about the murder. Number 4. Bill and Sandra Inman. It's not unusual for someone to hate their in-laws, but Bill and Sandra Inman felt pure hatred for their son's estranged wife, 25-year-old Summer Inman. So when the young mother of 3 vanished in 2012, it wasn't surprising that suspicion fell on the family. The couple's animosity towards Summer stemmed from her decision to leave their son and the father of her children, William Jr. She quickly entered into a new relationship, which only seemed to put her further at odds with the family. Summer had also allegedly accused her estranged husband of threatening to kill her. According to a witness, 2 men approached Summer outside her job in Logan, Ohio, late one night. They forced her into a car which was driven by a woman and sped off. The next day, the Inmans coincidentally spent an hour and a half cleaning their car at a local car wash. They took the car to a salvage lot and traded it in for a nice set of wheels and tires for some junky replacements. About a week after Summer vanished, Sandra Inman caved to pressure from police and led them to a septic tank behind the church the family went to, where Summer's body had been hidden all that time. She had been strangled to death with a zip tie. During questioning, Sandra admitted to the kidnapping, but claimed one of her co-conspirators accidentally killed Summer by tightening the zip tie around her neck too much. But this explanation failed to convince the court that the trio were anything other than cold-blooded killers. Sandra pleaded guilty to murder, kidnapping, abduction, tampering with evidence, as well as gross abuse of a corpse. She was sentenced to 15 years to life. William Sr. and William Jr. were both convicted of murder and handed life sentences too. Number 3. Joseph and Erin Meyers. After meeting online, Joseph and Erin Meyers got married in the Philippines and settled down in rural Wayland, New York. Joseph was the successful owner of a small business, but he wanted to expand his pursuits by buying up a tow truck company. Erin wanted to move some of her relatives to the United States. The couple couldn't afford to do either of these things though, so they brainstormed ways to come up with a large amount of money to fund their ambitions. They set their sights on 60-year-old David Odell, a childhood friend of Joseph's who suffered from intellectual setbacks thanks to a head injury he received during an accident a few years earlier. Odell worked part-time for Meyers, and Erin acted as his main caretaker. Sadly, his vulnerabilities made him an easy target. In 2015, Erin convinced David to sign his house over to her name. She then took out a $60,000 insurance policy on the property, a $40,000 life insurance policy on David's life, with herself as the sole beneficiary, and $45,000 renter's insurance policy on some items she kept at the property. By then, Erin had already tried killing David by taking away his medicine, which she and Joe mistakenly thought would make him have a fatal seizure. So they resorted to Plan B in early 2016 and burnt down David's home. He became trapped in the fire and quickly died. Surveillance footage showed Erin removing her belongings from Odell's property right before Joseph walked over with a torch. Just minutes later, the house was in flames. The Meyers may have thought they were about to hit a windfall, but their plan was not foolproof, and it didn't take long for them to land at the top of the authorities' suspect list. Both Joe and Erin were convicted of second-degree murder and were sentenced to 23 years to life in prison. Number 2. Stephanie Olsen and Dave Dressman. After graduating high school a year early in 2002, Stephanie Olsen was basically an adult in everything but age. She was still living under her mother, Diane Smellin's roof in Georgetown, Kentucky, though, and as long as she was there, she was expected to follow strict rules. And when Stephanie brought up the idea of moving in with her boyfriend, Dave Dressman, Diane still had the legal authority to tell her no. A blowout then started between the mother and daughter, and Stephanie ran off with David despite Diane's obvious disapproval. Diane filed a missing persons report, and police found the couple in Georgia. They quickly sent Stephanie back to Kentucky, where her relationship with her mother became even more heated. After the disappearing act the young lovers pulled, Diane became even less tolerant of the relationship. By then, Stephanie was almost old enough to do whatever she wanted without her mother's say. But she and David were apparently unwilling to wait, so they decided that Diane urgently needed to be removed from the picture. They spoke with a man named Timothy Crabtree, who had recently moved to the area from North Carolina and was rumored to be a serial killer. Crabtree agreed to help the couple get rid of Diane for a cut out of the $200,000 life insurance payout Stephanie was expecting. On the night of the single mother's planned death, Stephanie and David stayed over at a friend's house to build up an alibi. The next morning, Stephanie went home and dialed 911 to report that she had found her mom dead. After ruling out Diane's boyfriend as the killer, police focused on Stephanie, who seemed very unfazed by the horrific crime, as well as David. They learned that the pair left their friend's house multiple times on the night of the murder without explaining where they had been. Investigators theorized that Stephanie went home and confronted Diane, at which point David showed up. A confrontation ensued, and David stabbed Diane to death while Timothy reportedly acted as a lookout. David was found guilty of complicity to murder and first-degree burglary. He received the lightest sentence possible of 20 years. Timothy Crabtree pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and received a 6-year prison sentence. And even though she didn't commit the actual stabbing, Stephanie was convicted of complicity to murder and was sentenced to 25 years for the crime. Number 1. Stephen and Sylvia Beersdorf. 21-year-old Rose Goggins gave birth just 10 months before she vanished from Lawrenceburg, Tennessee back in 2010. At the time, she was engaged to a man named Stephen Beersdorf Jr., a member of the Tennessee National Guard who was getting ready for his deployment to Iraq. Goggins lived with Stephen's parents, Stephen Sr. and Sylvia, who reported her missing when she failed to turn up at her EMT class. Rose's burnt car was found about an hour away from where she lived, and law enforcement started to suspect that she had been murdered, even though they didn't find the body. Stephen Jr. was quickly ruled out as a suspect, but his parents were at the center of the investigation after an inmate who worked at their property told detectives the Beersdorfs completely hated Rose. The informant even claimed that Stephen Sr. offered to pay him to kidnap the young woman. During police questioning, Stephen Sr. allegedly admitted to strangling Rose to death during an argument that happened after she said she wanted to pack up her baby and move. A search of the Beersdorf's property discovered Rose's fragmented and scattered remains. Based on the condition of her body, authorities believed she had been roughly chopped up with a backhoe. Stephen Sr. took a plea deal and was later convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder in exchange for a life sentence with no possibility of parole. Prosecutors dropped a first-degree murder charge against Sylvia after concluding that she knew about the murder but didn't participate in it. She was sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy to commit murder and was officially released early in 2019.
Lourdes Hernandez. During the early morning hours one day in 2020, New Mexico State Police Officer Gustavo Avina pulled a vehicle over for speeding at 73 miles per hour. 117.5 kilometers per hour, in a 55 mile per hour, 88.5 kilometer per hour zone. Behind the wheel was a 25-year-old off-duty Las Cruces officer, Lourdes Hernandez, who parked in the middle of a traffic lane for the traffic stop. She told the trooper that she had her service gun on her. According to a state police report, she seemed impaired. As she rummaged through her car for her insurance and registration, she told Avina that she never gets pulled over. When the officer mentioned how she had pulled over in the middle of the road, she said it again, that she never gets pulled over. Avina asked Hernandez if she had been drinking, mentioning that he smelled alcohol and that her eyes were red. Hernandez denied drinking any booze and began to tear up as she explained that she and her boyfriend had just gotten into a fight. She refused a breathalyzer, which comes with an aggravated DWI charge under New Mexico law, and also refused to take a field sobriety test. Authorities also charged Hernandez with speeding and negligent use of a deadly weapon. She was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the case. 8. Russell Brown. During a vacation to Scottsdale, Arizona in early 2023, Canadian Supreme Court Justice Russell Brown allegedly got drunk and began behaving strangely. He was accused of approaching a group of guests at a luxury resort and spa, and sitting with them uninvited and trying to follow guests to their rooms. According to the cringeworthy details of a police report, Brown bragged about the importance of his job position to the group of people he joined in the lounge. He also read some lines from a speech he delivered earlier that day. The report claimed that some female witnesses described Brown as creepy, and that he continued kissing their hands and flirting after they asked him to stop. They were the same women who later said that Brown tried going back to their rooms with them. An onlooker named Jonathan Crump reportedly punched the judge several times to try getting him to leave the women alone. He said he told Brown that he was clearly intoxicated and that he was making people uncomfortable. Brown allegedly pushed Crump, who responded by pushing him back and clocking him twice. By the time police arrived, Brown was in his room and didn't answer the door. Officers took a report from Crump and others who were willing to talk, and they concluded that Crump's decision to punch Brown appeared reasonable and necessary. And while no arrests were made, Crump complained to Canada's Supreme Court, and Brown was put on leave pending the outcome of an ongoing investigation. He initially avoided commenting to the media, but has denied Crump's allegations and claims that he was attacked in an unprovoked fashion. 7. Mary Kavanaugh. In early 2022, police in Livonia, Michigan pulled over a vehicle that was swerving all over the road and had 2 flat tires. The traffic stop was enacted after an officer heard the thumping sound of the vehicle's deflated wheels rotating on the pavement. The driver, Michigan Representative Mary Kavanaugh, clearly seemed impaired. According to a police report, she said to the officer, "I feel like I had some type of tire or something." He told the cop that she was coming from a political meeting, but was unable to tell him where it had occurred. Kavanaugh repeatedly rifled through the same stack of papers, which clearly did not contain the documents the officer had asked her for. When he asked her if she knew how her tires popped, she said no. The boozed-up lawmaker was charged with operating a vehicle while intoxicated. It was her second case, and she publicly admitted to it. She said that she struggles with addiction and apologized for her actions. Kavanaugh pleaded guilty to the charge and was sentenced to probation and ordered to pay fines. She still holds her position as a representative. 6. Casey Anderson. In 2022, officials in Montgomery County, Maryland, received an anonymous email accusing the county's planning board chairman, Casey Anderson, of having a full bar in his office. The complaint accused Anderson of drinking on the job, along with members of the Department of Parks and the Montgomery County Planning Department. In the words of the email, Anderson has over 32 bottles of hard liquor in his office, where he routinely creates mixed drinks and distributes them on a significant scale. The message also claimed that he had forced coworkers and colleagues to drink on several occasions. An investigation was launched. The whistleblower insisted on staying anonymous, but dropped the names of 10 employees who allegedly drank with Anderson, or at least had first-hand knowledge that it was going on. A confidential internal report obtained by 7 News revealed that at least 2 employees confessed to drinking with Anderson in his office, on an average of 2 times per month. Another employee admitted to participating in the festivities, but said that they didn't interpret it as being overly wrong because these extracurriculars typically happened outside normal work hours and on Fridays. But the county has a zero-tolerance policy toward alcohol, and Anderson's liquor stash was in direct violation of the rules. Anderson admitted to having the alcohol, but denied ever pressuring anyone to drink. He emptied out the cabinet and took full responsibility for his actions, admitting that he should have never brought alcohol into the workplace, even if it was only being consumed after work. 5. Jody Warner. Unlike some of the government officials you'll hear about in today's video, former Dallas Assistant Prosecutor Jody Warner wisely ordered an Uber when she had been drinking and needed to get home one night in 2017. But her smart decisions apparently ended there. During the ride, Warner allegedly ordered the driver, Sean Platt, to stop using GPS and to follow her instructions instead. He said that she stopped giving him directions at some point and an argument ensued, during which Warner began calling Platt names and implied that if he called the police, they would believe her story over his because of her job position. Realizing that she could be right, Platt took his phone out and began recording the attorney's obnoxious behavior. She pushed the limits to the point where he asked her to get out of the car. Warner refused, demanding that Platt either take her home or get the cops involved. The frustrated driver opted for the latter and waited patiently for the police to arrive while Warner continued to berate him, calling him a joke, an idiot, and other insulting names. She even threatened that the cops would F him up, told him to shut the F up, and accused him of committing a felony and kidnapping her by refusing to drive her home. Platt turned the footage over to the Dallas Morning News, and it quickly went viral. It wasn't long before Dallas County District Attorney Faith Johnson announced that Warner had been fired. During a press conference, Warner claimed that she felt uncomfortable when Platt took a different route to her house than the one she's accustomed to. She said she went into fight or flight mode and that not everything Platt accused her of was true. Warner apologized, but to some, it sounded like she was also continuing to make excuses for her abhorrent behavior. 4. Jed Fillingham. A senior executive for the U.S. Veterans Affairs Department named Jed Fillingham was in Dallas for a conference in 2010 when he was met with an unexpected tragedy. He and 2 colleagues went out drinking together and then got into a vehicle together and headed toward their next destination. During the drive, 38-year-old Amy Wheat fell out of the car and died. Police took Fillingham into custody on suspicion of intoxication manslaughter, but authorities declined to bring charges when his blood alcohol level tested at 0.03, well below the legal limit for driving in Texas. It is possible that Fillingham was drunk at the time of the accident. The test wasn't administered until 6 hours after the accident, and 12 hours after he first entered the bar, which gave him plenty of time to sober up. Records show that he and colleague Chad Barney charged over a dozen drinks to their credit cards that night, totaling 14 beers, 12 Jaeger bombs, and 2 servings of vodka. According to a police report, investigators ruled out foul play and concluded that Amy Wheat exited the vehicle on her own accord. Fillingham was found in violation of VA policy, however, and resigned from his position amid the controversy, but was rehired for a different role the following year. Wheat's mother, Annette Berry, was outraged at the lack of consequences against Brown, as well as the fact that he was back to making a 6-figure salary within months of her daughter's tragic death. 3. Teresa Gruber. At least 6 U.S. Social Security Administration employees implicated one of the agency's top officials for acting intoxicated on the job in 2022. The allegations came to light during an investigation stemming from a complaint about Deputy Commissioner Teresa Gruber, who oversees an estimated 9,000 employees and is in charge of a $1.2 billion budget. Witnesses described observing Gruber with slurred speech, walking out of meetings without explanation, slouching, and acting volatile. 3 senior staffers who served directly under her confirmed the claims to the Washington Post on condition of anonymity. By the time the story broke out in mid-2022, the number of complaints against Gruber only seemed to be growing, yet she remained on the job. In the meantime, employees claimed that her erratic behavior had also continued. The staff members who complained admitted that they hadn't seen Gruber drinking, but said that her behavior caused them to wonder if she was drunk. There was also speculation that the 53-year-old was acting strange due to poorly managed diabetes. Either way, it was affecting her ability to do her job, according to those who raised the alarm. An investigation concluded that Gruber had, in fact, displayed significant anomalies over the last year on the job. She was reassigned as a senior advisor to acting Social Security Commissioner Kilolo Kijakazi. 2. Gerald Johnson. During the fall of 2021, police were called to a home in Habersham County, Georgia, in response to a report about a domestic incident. They arrived to find the county's top judge, Chief Magistrate Gerald Johnson, in his yard with a gun in his hand. He was allegedly drunk and had broken his wife's car window, shot the gun several times, asked a deputy to turn off his body cam, and was also accused of pointing the weapon at responding officers. While law enforcement chose not to criminally charge Johnson, the sheriff reported the incident to the Judicial Qualifications Commission during a hearing in late 2022, after being suspended for a year pending the outcome of the investigation. According to the attorney, Johnson was shooting his gun and drinking in the privacy of his property. He had also completed a treatment program for alcohol abuse. In Johnson's words, "I used alcohol as an escape and it became a prison." He testified that he only remembered parts of the ordeal that put his career in jeopardy. The hearing concluded that the sheriff's deputies who responded to the scene on the day of the judge's drunken outburst showed preferential treatment by not arresting him. Additionally, the panel determined that Johnson had violated the Judicial Code of Conduct and recommended his removal from the bench. Instead of sticking around until he was terminated, Johnson resigned. In a statement, he wrote that he respectfully disagreed with the committee's findings, but he apologized for his behavior and acknowledged that the situation affected the public's perception of his ability to be a good judge. 1. Chicago woman tries to walk through drive-thru. A 27-year-old Chicago woman made headlines in 2012 when she walked up to a McDonald's drive-thru window in Greenfield, Wisconsin in the middle of the night. One can only imagine that she must have been at least somewhat intoxicated to try ordering in such an unconventional way. A long line of cars formed behind her as an employee told her that she can't use the drive-thru as a walk-through. The woman refused to go away, so a staff member called the police. When officers arrived, she reportedly told them that she was a level GS-14 government employee, which would put her one level below the top rank, and that she made over $100,000 per year. But law enforcement was no more impressed by the claim than the fast food employees. An officer tried escorting the woman away from the drive-thru, but she allegedly crossed her arms and yelled at him not to touch her. She started to storm off in another direction and was hit with a disorderly conduct charge. According to a police report, she smelled of booze, her speech was slurred, and her eyes were glassy and bloodshot. Her blood alcohol level tested out at a .197, more than twice the legal limit for driving. Perhaps the one takeaway in her favor is the fact that she didn't get behind the wheel.
James Craig. In early 2023, 43-year-old mother of 6 Angela Craig began suffering from unexplainable headaches and dizziness. She sought medical help twice, but she was left without answers both times as her mysterious sickness continued. And while relatives hoped it was just a sinus infection, they knew it was more serious when Angela's condition began to rapidly worsen about 2 weeks after the first onset of symptoms. Her husband, a well-respected 45-year-old dentist named James Craig, met her at a hospital near their home in Aurora, Colorado, where she had a seizure and was put on life support. Unfortunately, the bizarre illness she suffered from took her life. James Craig was conspicuously absent from the hospital while Angela fought for her life, according to her family, who became suspicious amid the dentist's apparent lack of concern for his wife's well-being. In the meantime, one of Craig's employees informed a hospital nurse that a canister of potassium cyanide had been delivered to the office earlier that week. The nurse then called the police and an investigation ensued. Craig allegedly tried to claim that he ordered the cyanide for Angela because she wanted to take her own life but couldn't get the chemical on her own. Her sister painted a much different picture though. And according to court documents, Angela's sister accused Craig of having multiple affairs. She also suspected Craig of trying to poison Angela on at least one occasion 5 years earlier and described him as a pornography addict. The sister said that Angela had considered leaving Craig multiple times, but he repeatedly talked her into staying in the relationship. Detectives uncovered ample evidence that Craig was cheating on his wife at the time of her death. Based on emails and other records, his mistress came to visit him during Angela's 2 prior hospital visits, indicating that Craig may have poisoned Angela twice in the weeks leading up to her death. The mistress was also in town when Angela died, which explains Craig's absence from the hospital. Authorities charged Craig with first-degree murder, believing that he put the cyanide in his wife's protein shakes. In addition to his affair, other secrets have emerged. The dentist is allegedly in $2 million worth of debt, including hundreds of thousands that were lost to bad cryptocurrency investments, gambling, and a Ponzi scheme. His dental practice was hemorrhaging money as he continued paying for his mistress to fly to the area for visits. And he also had multiple ongoing bankruptcy cases and had taken out several large insurance policies on Angela's life. In the end, Craig pleaded not guilty and was banned from contacting 3 of his children. He's currently being held without bond, and if convicted, he faces life in prison without parole. 10. Seth Lart. A video that was captured at a dental practice in Anchorage, Alaska in 2016 showed dentist Seth Lart floating into a room on a hoverboard and pulling a sedated patient's tooth. He rolled away as he removed his gloves and mask, flashing a smile for the camera. The patient, Veronica Wilhelm, was unconscious at the time of the procedure. She had no idea that she was being filmed or that Lart was on a hoverboard, and she was less than happy when she found out. She was one of several patients who reported Lart for suspected malpractice, including another patient whose teeth were removed without their consent. Someone else who trusted Lart as a professional dentist was repeatedly forced to return to the office for aftercare. And one man even claimed he was given such poorly fitted dentures that he struggled to eat, talk, and breathe. A lengthy federal investigation also uncovered shocking evidence of Lart fraudulently billing the taxpayer-funded need-based health insurance program known as Medicaid for needless procedures, including unnecessarily sedating patients. Employees would later testify in court that the dentist pushed for patients on Medicaid to be sedated, while he opted for a local anesthesia for patients with private insurance. Yet, according to Alaska state law, dentists are only allowed to sedate Medicaid patients who are uncontrollable or severely anxious, or those who are undergoing emergency surgery. To make matters worse, sedated patients were left unattended and experienced breathing and respiratory complications as a result. Some of them nearly died due to the dentist's shoddy work. In some cases, patients awoke to discover that Lart had removed the wrong teeth or had done other things that deviated from their agreed-upon treatment plan. Altogether, Lockhart was accused of stealing $250,000 from his partners and fraudulently billing Medicaid to the tune of $1.8 billion. He opted for a bench trial, which meant that the judge decided his fate rather than a jury, and was convicted of 46 counts of felony medical assistance fraud, felony scheme to defraud, and misdemeanor counts of illegal dentistry practice and reckless endangerment. His practice was also found guilty of 40 other counts related to the case. Lockhart was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison with 8 years suspended, which means he'll spend 12 years behind bars. In a statement, he apologized for his actions and said that he hopes to someday practice dentistry again. 9. Eddie Orabitka. In what can only be described as a case of bizarre irony, a Florida dentist who advertises his gentle touch on patients was arrested in May 2023 for allegedly bludgeoning a doctor over the head with a golf club. 52-year-old Dr. Eddie Orabitka was accused of losing his temper at a couple for walking on the golf cart path at a country club in Lake County, where he was golfing with his son. According to an arrest affidavit, Orabitka told Dr. Joseph Sivak and his wife that the path was strictly reserved for golf cart use and that there was a rule against walking on it. The two men began to argue, and it became so heated that Sivak's wife dialed 911. In the background, Sivak could be heard telling Orabitka that he lived in the community and knew the rules. Orabitka was accused of escalating the verbal spat into a physical attack by swinging his golf club at Sivak's legs and then at his face. The arrest affidavit stated that Sivak tried to defend himself with a water bottle as Orabitka struck him in the side and back of the head. During the 911 call, Sivak's wife became hysterical, yelling that the men just wouldn't stop and that they were beating each other with golf clubs. Sheriff's deputies arrived to find Sivak covered in blood. His earlobe was ripped and needed stitches, and a visit to the hospital revealed that he'd broken ribs and a fractured cheekbone. In an interview with Fox 35 after the ordeal, Sivak said that Orabitka rushed up behind him and his wife, screaming and swearing while the couple took their daily walk together. They were briefly passing through the golf cart path when Orabitka confronted them. Sivak said he fell unconscious after being struck with the dentist's golf club, and that it scared him to think about how he could have died. And while the upscale neighborhood he lives in has an impeccable safety record, he said that he may be too traumatized to resume his outdoor walks. The incident shattered Sivak's view of the neighborhood, and he said it would take a lot to regain trust in his surroundings. Orabitka told law enforcement that Sivak was the aggressor and that the doctor got in his face and spat on him when he asked the couple to move out of the way. He accused Sivak of starting the physical fight by hitting him on the face with a water bottle. According to the affidavit, Orabitka thought Sivak was going to steal his golf clubs and attack his son with them. He then claimed that he only hit Sivak in self-defense. Both Sivak's wife and Orabitka's son both reportedly pointed the finger at Orabitka, telling deputies that the fight escalated when the dentist spat in Sivak's face. In footage of the arrest, Orabitka seems surprised that he was in trouble, but in the end, he was charged with felony aggravated battery and was released on a $5,000 bond pending the outcome of the case. 8. Colin Howell. After enduring an abusive 3-year marriage to the father of her 2 children during the early 1990s, Kyle Jorgensen moved to the UK and started her new life. She joined a church in County Derry, Ireland, where she met her future second husband, a dentist and father of 4 named Colin Howell. Within just 5 months, the two of them were married, and they went on to have 5 kids together. In 1998, just 2 years into the couple's marriage, Howell sat Jorgensen down one day and confessed out of nowhere to cheating on his first wife, Leslie. He then went on to admit that he murdered Leslie and his mistress's husband, Trevor Buchanan, 8 years earlier in 1991. Police found the victims' bodies in an exhaust-filled car and concluded that Leslie and Buchanan were having an affair and took their own lives as part of a pact. The pair were surrounded by photos of their children, and a portable CD player in Leslie's hands played religious music. Howell and his mistress, Hazel Stewart, planned the double murder so they could spend the rest of their lives together. They carried out their affair at each other's homes and in the chair at Howell's dental practice. But they didn't live happily ever after like they planned, and their relationship ended shortly before Howell met Jorgensen. After telling Jorgensen about his crimes, he bullied her into remaining silent. She later told the Mirror that she tried telling some people at church about it, but Howell was such a respected community member that people either didn't believe her or wouldn't listen to her. Finally, in 2009, Howell confessed to the double murder at Jorgensen's urging. By then, he'd lost one of his children to a tragedy, along with £350,000 to a get-rich-quick scheme, leaving him plagued by guilt and convinced that he was being punished for his past. Howell pleaded guilty to both murders and was sentenced to life in prison. Hazel Stewart, however, only received an 18-year sentence for her role in the crime. 7. Bobby Nichols. Tragedy struck a quiet community in Tyler, Texas one evening in 2012 when 71-year-old Rosalind Nichols was shot to death inside her home. Her husband, a 75-year-old retired dentist named Bobby Nichols, dialed 911 and immediately confessed to being the shooter. According to the police, Rosalind was upset with Nichols for going out drinking during the day. They argued for hours after he returned home, and Rosalind asked her husband to leave several times, but he refused. At some point, Nichols went to his vehicle and retrieved his gun. He then went back inside the home, argued some more with his wife, and then fired 2 bullets into her stomach. Officers arrived at the scene to find him crying and saying that he ruined his family's lives. Nichols was charged with murder and bonded out of jail while awaiting trial. His bond was revoked, however, after he violated the terms of his release multiple times by buying alcohol. In court, he described how he and Rosalind had traveled to Europe with a college alumni group a month before her death. During the trip, Rosalind became frustrated with Nichols' declining health, leaving him feeling, in his words, awful empty. He claimed that he didn't mean to kill Rosalind and that he only meant to scare her. The jury didn't buy his argument, but they did rule that Nichols acted in a moment of sudden passion. Legally, this required the court to reduce what would otherwise be a life sentence to 20 years. He would have become eligible for parole after 10 years, but he passed away in prison in 2018. Friends and neighbors were shocked to learn that Bobby Nichols fatally shot his wife, because the couple had always seemed very happy together. 6. Dr. Dennis Bloom. While getting a tooth pulled in Provo, Utah in 2014, 22-year-old college student Jared Wakefield began choking on a piece of gauze. The dentist, Dr. Dennis Bloom, tried unsuccessfully to clear the young man's airway. A staff member dialed 911, but Wakefield went into cardiac arrest while waiting for help to arrive. Paramedics then rushed him to the hospital, but he was barely clinging to life by the time he made it to the medical facility. When doctors finally got Wakefield's heart beating again, 37 minutes had passed. At that point, his brain was severely oxygen deprived, and the chances of him recovering were practically non-existent. Doctors declared him brain dead 2 days later, and his shocked family grappled with the news as he succumbed to his injuries. The Utah Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing, DOPL, found that Dr. Bloom engaged in unprofessional conduct during Wakefield's fatal procedure. According to state investigators, Bloom failed to count the number of gauze pieces he put in Wakefield's mouth, and he also didn't attach string to the gauze, which would have enabled him to pull it out of Jared's throat when the gauze got stuck. Dr. Bloom was fined $2,500 and was publicly reprimanded for the incident. He was also ordered to attend an emergency medicine class, and he was banned from performing on patients under general anesthesia. The victim's brother, Robert, initially assumed that Wakefield's death was the result of a freak accident. He was surprised to discover that similar fatalities aren't nearly as uncommon as he thought. Robert was also troubled to discover that the DOPL doesn't keep track of the number of reports it receives each month. The agency isn't legally required to maintain these statistics, despite the requirement for dentists to report any incidents of injury or death to the DOPL within 30 days. In the wake of the tragedy, Robert campaigned for heightened accountability for dentists in Utah. 5. Gilberto Nunes. When 44-year-old Thomas Coleman Jr. failed to show up at his job as a physical therapist one day in 2011, his wife, Linda, went searching for him. She found him dead in his car outside a gym near his home in New York's Hudson Valley. There was no obvious trauma to his body, but surveillance footage showed the dedicated family man meeting up with someone during the early morning hours. The video was grainy, but the mystery person was identified as Coleman's best friend, 51-year-old Gilbert Nunes, who ran a respected dental practice in the neighboring town of Saugerties. A toxicology test found a sedative called midazolam in Coleman's body, and vials of the drug were found in Nunes' office. Investigators soon learned that Nunes was having an affair with Coleman's wife Linda at the time of his best friend's death. Coleman knew about the affair and surprisingly had tolerated it while waiting for Linda to decide who she wanted to be with. Suspecting that Nunes knew Linda was planning to stay with her husband, detectives theorized that he killed Coleman because he saw it as the only way to keep the relationship going. Nunes denied any involvement in Coleman's death, but he had to argue his case in court in defiance of a second-degree murder charge. A jury acquitted him of murder, but found him guilty of felony forgery charges for furnishing fake CIA documents in a bizarre bid to frame Coleman for having an affair with a non-existent woman. He was also convicted of insurance fraud for overinflating the damages of an office fire and perjury for lying on a pistol permit application. The judge sentenced Nunes to 2 1/3 to 7 years in prison. However, he served just 19 months before being released early based on New York's merit time policies toward non-violent offenders. But although he was free, his request to regain his license to practice dentistry was denied. 4. Lionel and Carno Guergia. In 2006, Lionel Guergia and his father Carno Guergia set up a dental practice in a poor neighborhood in Marseille, France. Just 4 years later, Lionel was the country's highest-paid dentist. In 2010 alone, he billed a total of $2.9 billion for procedures that were performed at his office. And he apparently used the proceeds to buy properties, luxury cars, and expensive artwork. Suspecting that the father and son dentist duo didn't become so profitable based on hard work alone, authorities launched an investigation into their business. They found that between 2006 and 2012, Lionel had performed 3,900 unnecessary root canals on 327 patients. He removed perfectly healthy teeth and replaced them with bridges that left many people in discomfort and pain. And in many cases, patients went into the office for fillings and other routine procedures, only to walk out with less teeth than they had before. According to France's National Health Service, which paid a large portion of the costs for these procedures, Lionel Guergia fitted patients with 28 times more bridges than the average dentist. He rushed through these procedures, often spending just 10 minutes completing work that typically takes 45 minutes to an hour. As a result, many patients suffered complications, infections, and in some cases, permanent disfigurements. Lionel and Carno Guergia were arrested for what a judge later described as a systematic scheme to exploit unsuspecting low-income patients. During a court hearing, Lionel insisted he never meant to hurt anyone, but both he and his father were found guilty. The judge sentenced Lionel to 8 years in prison, while Carno received a 5-year sentence. In a move rarely seen in a French court, both men were ordered straight to prison, while a crowd of onlookers clapped and cheered. Lionel and Carno left many people in agonizing physical pain, but the emotional and social effects of their injuries were just as damaging. Charles Adelson. 41-year-old Daniel Markle was a Harvard-educated law professor who taught at Florida State University in Tallahassee. But his seemingly perfect life was disrupted in 2014 when he became entangled in an acrimonious divorce and child custody war with his estranged wife Wendy Adelson, who hated living in the Panhandle. Wendy wanted to return to South Florida where her family lived, but moving wasn't an option because a judge had ordered shared custody of her and Markle's 2 kids. When Markle was shot dead outside his home one day while talking on his cell phone, investigators naturally turned their suspicion toward Wendy Adelson and her family. They traced the actual shooting to two men named Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera, who drove up to Tallahassee from South Florida in a rental car to carry out the murder. According to prosecutors, Garcia was hired by a woman named Catherine Magbanua to carry out the hit, and he enlisted Rivera's help. Magbanua not only worked for the dentistry practice owned by Wendy Adelson's family, she'd also dated Wendy's brother Dr. Charles Adelson, who worked at the practice as a dentist. The Adelsons adamantly denied any involvement in Markle's murder, despite the growing number of connections linking them to the killers. Investigators struggled to obtain enough evidence to arrest any of the family members. Emails showed that Wendy's mother was irrationally preoccupied with her daughter's custody case and that she harbored a deep hatred toward Markle. But none of the messages were damning enough to prove criminal intent. Phone records and secretly recorded conversations between family members and other suspects were shady but not overtly incriminating. The accused killers made some expensive purchases after the murder, suggesting that they were paid for the hit. Magbanua received thousands of dollars worth of payments from the Adelsons, in addition to her wages, and made $44,000 in suspicious bank deposits in the month leading up to the crime. And one of Wendy's ex-boyfriends told law enforcement that Wendy told him her brother was looking for a hitman to kill her ex. But even all this wasn't enough to charge any of the family members in connection with Markle's death. In the meantime, Garcia and Rivera were convicted of murder. Garcia was sentenced to life in prison, while Rivera received a 19-year sentence in exchange for his willingness to testify against Magbanua, who was also sentenced to life behind bars for her involvement in the crime. Finally, in 2022, authorities charged Charles Adelson with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder. He adamantly maintains his innocence, but he's scheduled to face trial in November of 2023. 2. Kirk Allan Turner. During a contentious separation from his estranged wife Jennifer in 2007, North Carolina dentist Kirk Allan Turner went to his marital home in Clemens so his friend Gregory Smithson could retrieve some property that was being kept there. Something went terribly wrong during the visit though, and Jennifer was slashed across the throat. According to court documents, Smithson dialed 911 and administered CPR, but Jennifer was beyond saving. Her windpipe was severed. The cuts to her neck were so deep that one of them went all the way through to her spine, and her jugular vein and carotid artery were both cut. Turner admitted to cutting Jennifer's throat, but insisted that he did so in self-defense. He told investigators that Jennifer came at him with a 7-foot spear during a conversation about personal matters and stabbed him multiple times in the thigh and groin area. Left with no other choice, the 50-year-old pulled out a pocket knife and slashed his soon-to-be ex-wife's neck twice. Unconvinced by Turner's self-defense claims, prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder, claiming that he was enraged by a lawsuit Jennifer had filed against his alleged mistress. They accused Turner of inflicting the injuries that he claimed were caused by Jennifer, while Turner's defense attorneys argued that it was impossible for his wounds to be self-inflicted. Turner adamantly denied the allegations and received overwhelming support from friends, family, and community members who testified to his gentle, solid, and all-American character. The same people also praised him for performing free dental work on soldiers before their deployments overseas. Described as both a Christian and a pillar of the community, Turner received more support than his defense attorney had ever seen in favor of a murder defendant. At the time, most of his assets were tied up in his divorce, leaving limited funds to cover his $1 million bail. But after spending several months in jail, he borrowed money from supporters and managed to bond out while awaiting trial. But not everyone believed in Turner's innocence. He and Jennifer's daughter Wendy had already cut ties with her father for leaving her mother for another woman. After Jennifer's death, she was quick to conclude that Jennifer would have never violently attacked someone. Several of Jennifer's friends agreed, claiming that they'd never seen any signs of her having a violent side. If convicted, Turner faced life in prison without parole. but the jury acquitted him of the murder charge, ruling that he killed Jennifer in self-defense and he was a free man once again. Turner sued the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, SBI, for allegedly trying to frame him, claiming that the two SBI agents fabricated blood evidence during his trial. And in the end, he was awarded a $200,000 settlement. 1. Daniel Gold. After paying a dentist in Scottsdale, Arizona, $3,500 for Invisalign treatment, Yingay Wolf was left with cut and bleeding gums rather than straighter teeth. The trays she was supposed to wear were too painful and made her bleed too much for her to continue with her treatment plan. Then, out of nowhere, one day her dentist, 31-year-old Dr. Daniel Gold, called her up and said he was cancelling her Invisalign regimen. He also said that he was cancelling patients' Invisalign treatments because it wasn't working. Wolf later told Arizona's family that she called Invisalign and learned that they had no record of her receiving their products. So she went to another dentist, who fitted her with the proper trays that she needed. Feeling scammed, Wolf reported her suspicions about Dr. Gold to the state's dental board. Wolf was one of 9 alleged victims, including several patients who'd filed complaints against Gold. One woman accused the dentist of stealing mail out of her unlocked car inside her garage. She also claimed that the thief changed her address to Gold's address. During an interview with Arizona's family, the individual responsible for the anonymous complaint wondered out loud why Gold, someone with a high-paying, respectable career, would resort to stealing identities and other crimes. Court documents revealed that a search of Gold's home turned up fraudulent driver's licenses, credit cards, and mail. Records also showed that Gold reportedly admitted to a burglary and blamed his actions on his bipolar disorder and a recent medication change. The man now faces 8 felony charges related to fraud, burglary, and identity theft. Because he hasn't been convicted, he's allowed to continue practicing dentistry for the time being. When a reporter tried to confront him outside his office, though, he refused to say anything and walked away. A man claiming to be the building's owner then kicked the reporter off the property. The accusations against Gold came just 3 months after he was charged with 3 counts of misdemeanor theft for allegedly stealing packages off people's doorsteps. He was identified as the suspect in all 3 cases based on home surveillance footage. But because the charges were misdemeanors, Gold wasn't required to report the allegations to the state's dental board. If your dentist was accused of seriously harming someone in an incident unrelated to their profession, and you were really happy with their work on your teeth, would you continue going to them during their pending court case? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye guys.